Hello and welcome to Unjustified, where we always cover the truth, the facts, the good, the bad, the ugly, on an unbiased and sometimes very unpopular opinion. If you're new to our channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to receive all of our newest videos. This is Lisa Montgomery. In late December 2020, Lisa's legal team submitted a petition. She is too mentally ill to be executed and she deserves mercy. However, in the tiny town of Skidmore, Missouri, where the crime was committed, there is little sympathy for that argument. Many there believe the final moments of Bobby Joe Stinnett was so horrific, the death sentence was absolutely warranted. Lisa Montgomery and Bobby Joe Stinnett got to know each other online through a shared love of dogs. They had corresponded for weeks on an online forum for rat terrier breeders called the Ratter Chatter. Montgomery told Stinnett that she was also expecting, and the pair shared pregnancy stories. In December of 2004, Lisa drove 175 miles from her home in Kansas to Skidmore, where she had an appointment to look at some puppies owned by Stinnett. Actually, Lisa that Bobby Joe was expecting. It was a woman who went by the name of Darlene Fisher, but Fisher was a name that Lisa had been using while she separately began messaging Bobby Joe from a different email address inquiring about buying one of her puppies. When Bobby Joe answered the door, Lisa overpowered the pregnant woman and strangled her with a piece of rope and cut the baby out of her womb. Investigators quickly realized that Darlene Fisher did not exist and tracked Lisa Montgomery down the next day using her emails and computer IP address. They found her cradling a newborn baby girl she claimed to have given birth to the previous day. Her story quickly fell apart and she confessed to the killing. Since 2008, Lisa Montgomery had been held in a federal prison in Texas for female inmates with special medical and psychological needs. Montgomery was scheduled to be put to death by a lethal injection of phenobarbital at the Terre Haute prison in Indiana. It is the only federal prison with an active death chamber. Lisa's lawyers argue that because of a combination of years of horrific abuse and a raft of psychological issues, she should never have been given the death penalty. 55% of Americans still believe it is an appropriate punishment for murder, and nowhere is that support more felt in this case than in Skidmore. Bobby deserves to be here today. Bobby's family deserves her, said Megan Morrow, a high school classmate of Bobby Joe's, and Lisa deserves to pay. Lisa Montgomery's current legal team has conducted some 450 interviews with family members, friends, caseworkers, doctors, and social workers. Stitched together, they form a tapestry of family dysfunction, abuse, neglect, professional negligence, substance abuse, and untreated mental illness. The whole story is tragic, said Kelly Henry, one of Montgomery's federal defense attorneys. For Lisa Montgomery, her lawyers argue, it began before she was born. According to an interview with her father, Lisa Montgomery's mother, Judy Shaughnessy, drank heavily throughout her pregnancy, and their daughter was born with fetal alcohol syndrome. Multiple medical experts have given statements agreeing with that diagnosis. When Diane and Lisa were young, their mother beat them and gave out cruel forms of punishment. Her mom was manipulative and, I hate to use this word, but evil. Family moved from place to place dozens of times. Her mother also began trafficking her, allowing handymen like electricians and plumbers in exchange for work on the house. As a teenager, Lisa confided in a cousin, telling him the man would tie her up, beat her, and even urinate on her afterwards. But the cousin, a sheriff's deputy, confessed to Lisa's current legal team that he did nothing. In fact, he drove her back home and dropped her off in the hands of her abusers. Lawyer Kelly Henry says one of the things that disturbs her the very most is that adults in positions of authority were told about what was going on but did nothing. When their mother eventually split from her second husband, her and Lisa testified in divorce proceedings. The judge in the case scolded her mother for not reporting the abuse, but he did not report the abuse himself. There were so many opportunities where people could have intervened and prevented this, said Henry. Lisa's cousin told her legal team that he lived with regret for not speaking up about what happened to Lisa. When Lisa was 18, she married her stepbrother. The couple had 4 children in 5 years, but the relationship was not the escape from violence that Lisa might have hoped it would be. Friends and family began noticing that Lisa's tendency was to slip into a world of her own. Her children were disturbed by it. Lisa eventually divorced her first husband and married Kevin Montgomery. Around this time, she repeatedly claimed to be pregnant again, and although she had undergone sterilization after her 4th baby was born. One theory her lawyers put forward regarding the chain of events that led to the murder is that Montgomery feared her ex-husband would expose her lies about being pregnant and use it against her as he sought custody for their children. There was so much pressure on her at that point, says Henry. She describes Lisa's ex-husband as cruel and harassing. She was completely detached from reality. Her lawyers say that she lost touch with reality and she fantasized about being pregnant. Henry says Lisa's original legal defense after she was arrested and charged with murder was inadequate and presented a few of the details about her abuse, trauma, and mental illness. Her lawyers at the time also presented an alternative theory of the crime, which was that Lisa's brother had actually committed the murder, even though he had an alibi. That was ultimately dropped in favor of an insanity defense. But Henry believes the damage to Lisa's credibility was already done. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lisa guilty. They recommended a sentence of death. Diane Mattingly has been speaking publicly for the first time in hope that it can make a difference. I want you to look at the life that Lisa has led. I want you to look at all the people that have failed her. I'm asking him to have compassion on her as a person that has been failed over and over and over again, and not to fail her again. The murder 16 years ago is never far from the minds of the town residents. For one thing, the wider world will not let them forget it. It has been the subject of 2 books, multiple true crime television shows, documentaries, and countless podcast episodes. And though there's been much recent debate over the fairness of Lisa's sentence in courthouses and in the opinion pages of newspapers like the New York Times, a similar debate does not exist here. I think that in a lot of the opinion pieces that are being posted, in a lot of things that the people are sharing, Bobby Jo and her daughter, and her mother and her husband, and other friends and family are kind of being forgotten, says Tiffany Kirkland, another member of the class of 2000. She always wanted to be a mom. She was really the first one to have a decent marriage, you know. Looking at Bobby Jo was like what your dreams were when you were younger. Because of Bobby Jo's easygoing reputation, Morrow remembers instantly dismissing the initial reports of her murder. I was like, oh, she was not. You know, like, that doesn't happen to Bobby, she said. But what happened at the modest house where Bobby Jo lived with her husband still haunts some of those involved in the investigation. Nottoway County Sheriff Randy Strong says that the scene that he and his 4 colleagues found that day was so bloody that they are still traumatized by it. It makes him even angrier that it was Bobby Jo's mother who discovered her that way. The people that are defending Lisa, I wish I could take them back in time and put them in that room, he said, and then go, look at this body, and for them to have to stand there and listen to the 911 call and begging, screaming, and crying of Bobby Jo's mother. This is the stuff of nightmares. Many of the residents of Skidmore cite the details of the crime that went into it as evidence that Lisa was a calculating killer. She had catfished Bobby Jo online under a fake name, had bought supplies, including a home birth kit, and she searched online for how to perform a cesarean section. Sheriff Strong insists that the crime was meticulously planned and that the woman he arrested continued to lie until backed into a court. Dr. Catherine Porterfield, a clinical psychologist who evaluated Lisa and spent about 18 hours with her, says that psychosis does not always look the way people expect it to. Being psychotic, it does not mean you are not intelligent, nor that you cannot act in a planful way, she says. We've seen crimes for years and years in our country in which people enact terrible violence coming out of a psychotic set of beliefs or thought process. Lisa Montgomery was no different. She enacted this. Bobby Jo's mother and husband have not spoken publicly in many years, but Strong says this is the first year he's heard directly from Bobby Jo's husband. He thanked the sheriff for recovering his daughter and allowing him to be the parent that his wife could not be. I cried, said Strong. The whole community over there is traumatized by this. One of the school friends said she's read the descriptions of Montgomery's abuse, but it mostly just makes her mad. She says it's not as if all of the other people of Bobby Jo led idyllic lives. She gives herself as an example. When Bobby Jo was murdered, I was in rehab for a drug addiction. I had to miss the funeral because of that. Let's say I didn't stay clean very long. I'm sick of hearing about Lisa Montgomery and what she went through, and it's never about what my friend went through, she adds. I get these images in my head of Bobby Joe's mother finding her daughter that way. Here you will see one of the many, many tweets that were going around social media and Twitter on January the 12th, 2021. People protesting for Lisa Montgomery not to be executed. Lisa spent the last day of her life inside a prison suicide cell. She was hallucinating and hearing her abusive mother's voice, suffering nightmares of the sexual torture that she had endured and drifting away in a house in her own mind. Her attorney, Kelly Henry, said Lisa was much more than the tragic crime she committed, a crime for which she felt deep remorse before she lost all touch with reality. From a curious girl who used books as a safe harbor to a woman whose mental illness overcame her. In small ways, Lisa's children remember her being present even for brief moments in time. When Lisa's daughter, Kayla Bowman, was 4 years old, the same age as Lisa, when her beloved half-sister Diane was taken away from her, her mother knitted a Looney Tunes blanket, and I treasure it, Bowman wrote to the court in 2013. Lisa has since crocheted baby blankets for Kayla's children, her grandchildren. After Lisa's conviction, Kayla did not speak to her mother for 2 years, but since then, the two reconnected before her death through pictures of Lisa's grandchildren sent across prison bars. In 2012, Kayla went to visit her mother in prison. It was the first time Lisa had been emotionally present with her own child. Kayla told the court in a declaration, "Mom realized right then what she had really missed out on with their kids and what was lost between us all." Lisa Montgomery committed a crime that she could never take back, and her actions had tragic consequences for Miss Dennett and her family. But Lisa herself was a victim of terrible crimes, and her actions are linked to her own history of trauma, mental illness, and brain damage. There is absolutely no denying in the fact that Lisa Montgomery had a horrible, horrific childhood. The system failed her. The system absolutely failed her. Doctors knew. Teachers knew. Even family that were law enforcement knew what was happening to her. No one done nothing to help her. She was failed by everyone in her life except her sister that she was separated from through the system. And then she came back with her mental illnesses, her revenge, her psychosis, everything, and done the unimaginable to a mother expecting her very first baby, a very innocent mother who befriended her. So I ask you, what is your decision in this? I have to be honest with you. What she did was absolutely premeditated. She set this up. She befriended this lady. She even told everyone she was pregnant, full term. She even set the date up and drove 175 miles to go to her home. The photo you're looking at right here is the day she was arrested, the day after she murdered brutally Bobby Joe Stanton. Do I think this lady has mental problems? I absolutely do. Absolutely. Do I think her childhood could have contributed to it? Absolutely. The system failed her. However, this was premeditated and this was horrific. Does two wrongs make a right? Should her life have been spared because of the abuse she endured and her mental illnesses as a child? However, she premeditated this, and she knew it was wrong. She knew what she was doing was wrong. She's had 4 children herself, so there's no doubt in my mind that she did not know the whole time she premeditated and planned this that it was wrong. Bobby Joe's daughter never knew her mother. Every year when she celebrates her birthday, she also is reminded of how she came to be born on December the 16th, 2004. Thank you all for listening. Drop your comments below, and until next time, This is Unjustified.